We are going to start a brand new series this morning. It's tentative to be 4 parts, but it might be more. And I'm calling it "Come and See." And what I want us to do, because I think a lot of times what we try to do when we read the Gospels is see Jesus, right? Because I believe when we really see Jesus, there's something that changes within us. Right? There's something when we really, I'm not talking about just reading the Gospels and having a lot of head knowledge about who Jesus is and what Jesus is, but I'm talking about seeing Jesus, seeing Him, not for what we want Him to be, but for who He actually is. And I think we have this misconception sometimes about what He does and what His purpose was. We got a lot of head knowledge and we got a lot of the doctrine but we don't see the human. Where's the human Jesus? Because bottom line, and this is what I believe, 100% I believe this, and I hope that you'll pay attention to this, because it's vitally, vitally important. For when you come into the Gospels and you start to read and you start to see Jesus, this is when you really see Jesus, this is what begins to happen. And this is what I believe needs to happen. How we see Jesus changes how we see others. 100% I believe. When we really see Jesus for who He is rather than who we want Him to be, it changes how we see other people. It changes how we see people in the world. Because you may have a perception of people in the world, or people who are homeless, or people who are doing immoral things. But what if you saw them as Jesus saw them? What if we saw Jesus, and then through seeing Jesus, we saw others like Jesus saw them? I mean, what if that was our perspective? What if we could just capture that for a moment in time and say how we see Jesus changes how we see others? But here's our difficulty. Here's our problem, and mainly just a human problem, because it doesn't just happen within the body of Christ, but it happens with human beings all over the place. When you're in organizations, institutions, workplaces, all this, that your perspective, sometimes our perspective pushes us towards pessimism, negativity, the worst possible outcome. Our perspective on life, the way that we see things, pushes us towards a negativity that doesn't have a positive outcome. And in reality, what those stem from is shaped by our experiences. Our perspective is shaped by what we experience, right? Mainly personal experiences. If we could draw on that for a moment. Personal experiences. And what we experience shapes our worldview. How we see the world, how we see the people that live in the world, how we see, our whole lens is tainted and moved and filtered by our experiences in life. Because our perspective is our perspective. Nobody has your perspective. Nobody has been exactly through what you have been through. There may have been similar cases. Nobody has dealt with what you have dealt with. Yes, there's been similar cases. But the perspective in your life is shaped by your experiences in life. If you have bad experiences with people, what are you going to think about people? I'd say this, and I don't know if this is true in other places, but I talk to a lot of people during the week. A lot of people that have nothing to do with this body of people. A lot of people who are living in our community. A lot of people who are somewhat religious in a sense, and people who believe in God but don't go to church because their view of God, their view of the church has been stained by their relationships with people, because people have been ill-willed toward each other, because people have done wrong things toward each other. And so they don't want to be a part of something that's complete, that where they don't treat each other, or where they're, I've heard comments of, well, they're inauthentic, or I don't like organized religion. And I start digging into these questions about, well, why? What caused you to go that direction? And you'd be amazed at some of the answers that you get. Or how about places to make it a little more real? Let's think about a place you went that you hated. A restaurant, a hotel, a spot. If you had a bad experience there, what are the chances you're going back? If you had a bad experience in some place, your perspective is shaped by that experience, that one-time thing that you did. How about items? things you bought that you shouldn't have bought. Maybe things you thought you needed, you bought, but then you found out you didn't need it all. Or maybe you bought something and you thought it was going to be something and then it really wasn't, and you took it back and returned it. I mean, if you have a bad experience, this is my whole point. If you have a bad experience with something, you're less likely to go buy that thing again. What about events? Ever been to a bad event? Ever been to an event you were like, well, I probably shouldn't have been there. Or that was really bad, or this was bad, or you have this view, this perspective, but then you talk to somebody else that was the same event, they have a completely different perspective. I mean, we meet people like this all the time because our each individual perspective is shaped by our own personal experiences of those particular things. And sometimes this is how it plays into God. Sometimes our view of God and Jesus is shaped by our life experiences. In fact, I would say that more commonly it is shaped by our life experiences. People I talk to in the world, their view of God is shaped by what they've experienced with people in the church. Their view of who Jesus is shaped by what they see. I mean, you remember that verse in John chapter 13 and verse 34 and 35? What does he say? They will know, by this they will know you are my disciples if you what? Have love for one another. I mean, if we're talking about the main thing, keeping the main thing, I mean, what if we just grasped this idea of loving one another and applied that? But that's where we're going to start. We're going to start in the beginning of the Gospel of John. Then John, here's what John does. When he begins chapter 1, he paints this beautiful synopsis of the entire book, beginning with 1 verse 1 and through 4, which we're all familiar. Remember, the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you're wondering, well, what does that mean? So you continue to read, and he gives the testimony of John. Here's John the Baptist in human form. He confessed that he was not the Christ. But then he witnessed to who the Christ was. And he said things like, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And people saw and they followed. And they were intrigued and they were curious. They didn't know exactly what it was. They'd probably had some bad experiences with some cult-type leaders that had come out and professed to be this particular thing. I mean, particularly we know this happened because of what Gamaliel says in Acts chapter 4. He says, if this is a real thing, we won't have to stop it. It'll stop on its own. But if it truly is the kingdom of God, there's nothing we can do to break it down. And so it makes me think that in this time period, this is what they're continuously seeing. And imagine, when you do something repetitiously, when you see something repetitively, eventually it's not new anymore. Eventually it gets old. Eventually it gets hard you don't even think about it anymore. And you're like, well, that's just the same thing it was at the beginning. And you become cynical. And you become negative. And so right at this section, when John points out Jesus, and you just put yourself in this scene. You're by the Jordan River. You're standing there listening to John speak, and he looks back in the back of the crowd and he says, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Would you look? What? That guy right there who's just walking by? That's who you're saying is the Messiah we've been waiting for. Because this is their concept of Messiah. The concept of, well, we're waiting for him to come. He's going to be this, their whole perspective of the Messiah was shaped by their rabbinic teachings. And that was that the rabbis believed that the Messiah, when he came, he was going to put the Jews back into social and economic power. They were going to have this great leader in the Messiah, and he was going to fight for the Jewish people and put them back and be the king of their kingdom. And nothing could be further from the truth. But it was their experience and their knowledge that put them in this place of, well, this is what I think he's going to be. But he surprised the world in many different ways. And so when you get to this part of John, you've got these young men perceived to be following Jesus, and they're telling their friends. And Philip is called. And it says, and the next day he purposed to go to Galilee, and he found Philip. And Jesus said to him, follow me. But this next account is the most interesting account, I think, in the first chapter. Because it opens our eyes to something I don't think we often give credit for. Look at this. Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, look, this is his testimony. This is Philip's testimony to Nathanael. We have found him, of whom Moses in the law and the prophets wrote. He's like, go to your book. This is the guy they're talking about. You remember that book we studied our whole lives? The thing we're ingrained so much in? Look, we found him. We found the guy who the prophets and Moses wrote about. Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. We found him. But this is where I think our perspective, our experiences in life shape our perspective to the point where we can land in a spot of pessimism. Because here's Nathanael's response. Nathanael said to him, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? I mean, what had Nathanael seen what did Nathanael see in the world that caused him to ask this question? Have you ever thought about that? What caused him to ask that question? Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? I mean, what did he experience? Who did he follow? What did he see? What kind of destruction? I mean, you just imagine what Nathanael had seen to get him to this point to where we found that guy. Oh, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Can any good thing? But I love Philip's response. He says, come and see. Don't just allow your perspective, your worldview, your experiences to push you to draw a conclusion without first going and seeing what it is. And this is the point. I mean, we have to see Jesus. Here he says, come and see. And then it skips forward a little bit. It says, Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him and said to him, behold, an Israelite, indeed, in whom there is no deceit. He calls this character, he identifies the character of Nathanael. I mean, we don't know anything about Nathanael up until this point, until Jesus identifies and says, look, here's a guy in whom there is no deceit. There is no deception. There is no cunning. There is no cleverness. What he's drawing out about his character is Nathanael is an honest individual. He's authentic. He's true. That's what he's calling out about who Nathanael is. He says, I know you, is essentially what he's saying. Because here's what Nathanael says. How do you know me? How do you know me? I mean, how else would God know him? Have you ever thought about that? Because Nathanael's perspective, even though it had been tainted by the world, his curiosity causes him to move forward to see what he's actually looking at, to affirm the claim that Philip made. We have found him, of whom Moses and the law and the prophets wrote. We found him. But let me see for myself. How do you know me? I mean, I've never met you in my life before. How do you know me? Jesus answered and said to him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Now, this seems so simplistic, doesn't it? What do you mean? How could he? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. I saw you under a fig tree. Would you walk by and see him under a fig tree? I mean, what does this mean? What is John deriving? What is he trying to get us to grasp? And what is he trying to get us to see? And I think it's somewhere along the lines of maybe not that Jesus walked by and saw Nathanael under a fig tree, but that rather Nathanael's connection with God was what allowed Jesus to see him. Because in the Old Testament, this is what we see. A fig tree is representative of a place of meditation and prayer. And this is where people would go to get quiet, listen, and talk to God. And there's this trifold connection between Jesus, the Father, and Nathanael in this moment. And this is why it's so fascinating. This is why Nathanael's story is like, how do you know me? Well, how does Jesus know Nathanael? Because Nathanael was talking to God. Nathanael was praying to God. Nathanael was, I don't know what he was praying for, but the assumption here is that this is what Nathanael was doing. Before Philip called you, before your friend came and got you, I saw you under the fig tree. And as quick as his assumption was to ask the question, how do you know me? His response is even more fascinating. Nathanael answered him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. I mean, rapid response. There's no question in his mind about who Jesus is. I mean, he hasn't even seen all of it yet. But this is his response from the things that he's heard from Jesus after he's had this very negative view of, well, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Well, how do you know me, Jesus? How do you know me? You don't know me. Jesus calls his character. And as soon as he figures it out, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. But do you know what this means? Do you know what Nathanael is actually saying here? I mean, yes, this is a confession about the identity of Jesus. But what are we saying when we say, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel? What are we proclaiming? What are we announcing? Do we really even believe that? I have to ask myself that question. Do I really believe that about Jesus? Have you thought about that in a while? Do I really, truly, wholeheartedly? Because there are responses that indicate that we really believe this, and there are responses that tell us we're on the fence. But look what he's describing here. This is crazy. Look at 50 and 51. Jesus answered and said to him, because I said to you that I saw you under a fig tree, do you believe? It's like, is this the only reason? Like I said, the response from Nathanael seems so simplistic, but in reality, it's so much deeper than we could possibly understand, because we're seeing Jesus in the eyes of his relationship. That's what this whole series is about. We want to see Jesus from the perspective of his relational doings with people. How was Jesus in a one-on-one conversation? Because I saw you under a fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. And he said to him, truly I say to you, you will see the heavens open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. You think you saw something, you think that was amazing, just wait for what's coming. Just wait till you see who I really am. Just wait till you see what I can really do. Because a lot of times this is where we find ourselves. We find ourselves in the same place as Nathanael and Philip and Peter at the end of the Gospel of John. But we're doubting, we're unsure. We don't really know. It's good to question why you believe what you believe. Don't get me wrong, I do it all the time. Because I have to know that what I believe is the truth. And I have to know that if I've got something wrong or I've got something put in the right place, that I have to shift and move and shape and form myself in the likeness of Jesus, not in the likeness of myself or the likeness of other human beings. I have to look at Jesus and go, I want to be like him, not like other people. But you think you saw something. But just wait till it's coming. And this is his whole point. Truly seeing Jesus changes everything. Have you ever been in a one-on-one conversion study with somebody? And you're having this Bible study, you've been doing it for weeks, and it's getting exhausting. And you're struggling because you're like, well, what am I putting all this work in for? What is this doing? What is the purpose of this? And then one week out of the blue, it's like a light bulb turns on. And they know what they need to do, and they know where they need to go, and they know what has to be accomplished. And it's that light bulb moment, like Nathanael, a light bulb moment that changes everything. It changes our perspective, it changes our worldview, it changes everything. Everything we think we know has officially changed once we come to know Jesus. And when we truly see Jesus, if we're talking about, somebody who's been a disciple for a long period of time, you've really got to go back and see Jesus. What did Jesus do? How did Jesus act? It's not per se, what would Jesus do? It's what did Jesus do? Why did he act that way? Why did he say those things? What am I supposed to do in response to that? This is the character we're trying to shape and mold and form our lives after. Because humanity is flawed and humanity fails. And no one in this room, no one in this world is perfect. And so that's why we all strive to be like Jesus. So I'll just leave you with one thing today. And I'll leave it at that if my clicker will work for me. See, technical difficulties. It is really, really important for us to understand. I kind of said this at the beginning, but we need to pay attention to this. Here it is. We need to see Jesus not as we want him to be, but as he is. Not as we want him to be. Do you know people who paint an image of Jesus because they want Jesus to be that way? And it doesn't even have to be I'm not talking about a painting. But when they describe something to you, when they describe the Lord, they have a perspective on him. We have to see him for what he is. That's what we're going to do in the Gospel of John. That's what we're going to do for the next 3 or 4 weeks. We're going to look at Jesus' personal interactions. This is an invitation for us to see Jesus, because I believe that when we see how we see Jesus and when we see Jesus, it changes how we see others. We have to stay focused on Jesus. We have to look at Jesus and say, what is his role in my life? How we see Jesus changes how we see others. You may be here this morning and have a need of some kind. We offer, that went quickly. I'm not singing that, by the way. You may have a need of some kind. We have a tradition here where if you would like to confess publicly or take your next step in your faith journey, whether that's baptism or a Bible study, you can come forward and let us know as we stand and sing.